So how could the sign of Jonah possibly be related to the character of God? At first, there's no obvious connection, but when we understand it properly, uh, we will see a connection, and I believe it is actually just about the strongest evidence of a self-sacrificing God of other-centered love. So we'll consider the context. On a day in Jesus' ministry when he had been healing a man possessed, blind, and dumb, the Pharisees accused him of healing by the power of the devil. So let's read Matthew 12:22 to 24. That's Dorothy, please.
Then was brought unto him one possessed with the devil, blind and dumb, and he healed him, insomuch that the blind and dumb both spake and saw. And all the people were amazed, and said, Is not this the son of David? But when the Pharisees heard it, they said, The fellow doth cast out devils, but by Beelzebub, prince of the devils.
Okay. Who were the people, not the Pharisees, but the people thinking Jesus might be?
The Messiah.
The Messiah.
Son of David, yeah.
Okay. So they thought he might be the son of David, which is another way of saying what?
He is God.
Okay. Specifically Messiah. Okay, Mark 12:35.
And Jesus answered and said, while he taught in the temple, how say the scribes that Christ is the son of David?
Okay, and then Christ means?
Anointed one, Messiah.
And John 1:41.
He first findeth his own brother Simon, and saith unto him, We have found the Messias, which is being interpreted the Christ.
Okay, so this obviously connects Messiah and the Christ, both meaning the anointed. Really. And who is Beelzebub?
Satan.
So there was a question of identity and of character. And God would do such things as healing the blind and the dumb and the possessed out of compassion and mercy, wouldn't he?
Mm-hmm.
But would Satan do such a thing?
No.
Sure.
No. So.
He can heal people to deceive people.
Okay, if he did anything like that, it would only be to deceive. Okay, we hear of, certain churches that have healings, and all sorts of things going on. They're, in many cases, deception. So the Pharisees' God, the God they believed in, would not do that, heal a man. Because in their minds, blindness was what? Okay, they regarded it as punishment from God because of sin. Yes. Okay, so John 9:2, Dorothy.
And his disciples asked him, saying, Master, who did sin, this man or his parents, that he was born blind?
Okay. So what were the Pharisees thinking? Here's some possibilities. God couldn't possibly be the power that healed the man and cast out the devil, because of course they thought something like blindness was a punishment from God. Therefore, it must be the power of Satan, the prince of the devils, that did it. They also believe that God actively punishes sin and perhaps even punishes the children of those that sin. If you might be thinking of Exodus 34:7, which says, visiting the iniquity of the fathers upon the children, I'd suggest you look at these two web pages here because they don't mean what it appears on the surface. And I'm just going to go there just so we're familiar with how to find these pages. You can just click on that, or I will just go here to my website, characterofgod.org. You can click on the glossary, and the glossary takes you to a page with a list of about 100 terms here, each one having a definition and examples from the Bible to explain the meaning. So if we go down to punishment, it takes you to a page with the definitions for punishment according to what I call the traditional legal model and the biblical healing model. And you can go through and it talks all about punishment. And the same thing with visit. You can click on that and navigate to the web page. In fact, guilt for sin is not transferable. That is the Bible truth. So Ezekiel 18:20.
And it reads, the soul that sinneth, it shall die. The son shall not bear the iniquity of the father, neither shall the father bear the iniquity of the son. The righteousness of the righteous shall be upon him, and the wickedness of the wicked shall be upon him.
Okay, so each person bears the results, whatever those are, of their own sins. Okay? So they misunderstood the nature of God's law, the Pharisees, obviously. In what way? How can we describe their misunderstanding of God's law?
I think they were more works-based, were they not?
They definitely were that. Yeah.
Yeah.
What about their understanding of God's law?
God is loving but just. God is loving but just.
Okay. Just, and what does just mean in their understanding, do you think?
He will punish you if you break the law.
Okay.
Violence.
No mercy.
Aggression.
Yeah. So another way of saying that is he will punish you, he will impose a result, a punishment on those that sin. And we've come to understand in this group that the results of sin, the negative results that come from the sin itself. Okay. Natural result. So Jesus, we're kind of going through the context of Matthew 12 here. Jesus countered their belief by saying in verse 25 and 26, divided kingdom cannot stand. And then he also said this in verse 27. Okay.
And if I by Beelzebub cast out devils, by whom do your children cast them out? Therefore they shall be your judges.
Okay. And children in this case is not young kids. It's not their biological offspring, but it's more, their whole group, the Pharisees and those they trained. It's kind of like saying the sons of the prophets or the school of the prophets. Kind of that idea. It's not biological children. In saying that, though, they created a dilemma for themselves. They couldn't say, Jesus asked them this question. They couldn't say that they cast out devils by the power of the devil. Well, they wouldn't want to say that. And they couldn't admit that Jesus had cast out devils by the power of God. So they were kind of stuck, and he seemed to get them in these...
You're so smart.
Yeah, he got them in these tricky dilemmas quite often, actually. So they were being consistent. That's what he was pointing out about them. Inconsistent, yeah. They were attributing a good result, deliverance from possession to the devil, to, the wrong source. Basically, if the results were good, the cause must be good. And Jesus also countered with this verse, 33.
Either make that tree good and his fruit good, or else make the tree corrupt and his fruit corrupt. The tree is known by his fruit.
Okay, so that's a way of saying if the result is good, it must come from a good source, right?
Yeah.
And Jesus was applying the good tree to himself, is really what he was doing here. And then he went on, verse 34.
I just remark here, I think that this Matthew 12:33 also tells us that good cannot be mixed with evil. Good cannot, if there is little bit of evil, if something, then it cannot be good. That cannot be in sense of God's goodness. It's not
Right.
from God.
Okay, good.
So
I think there's another verse quite similar to this that kind of makes it even stronger, that a good tree can only bring good fruit. A bad tree, only bad fruit.
So that means to me it tells that if there is kind of justice which requires suffering or punishment, even death, that's not God's way.
Okay. Right. Yeah, that's another way of saying he does not impose suffering for sin. And he's trying to save us from that, actually. So he was applying the good tree to himself. Verse 34.
O generation of vipers, how can ye, being evil, speak good things? For out of the abundance of the heart the mouth speaketh.
Okay, good. And then verse 35.
Good man out of the good treasure of the heart bringeth forth good things, and an evil man out of the evil treasure bringeth forth evil things.
Okay. Here's a little, the new ones in this group won't recognize this, but we've used this little cartoon very often in this group because it is actually a very, very good illustration. And the sink here that's overflowing with water represents the tree, a good or bad tree, or really the heart or mind. Okay? And out of the heart comes this mess on the floor, basically. And the idea here is these two poor janitors will never clean up that mess as long as the water is still pouring into the overflowing sink, right? So we've used that many times. But the mess on the floor here represents the fruit, the words that are coming out of the heart or the mind. Okay? So isn't this whole discussion very much a question about character?
Mm-hmm.
We've talked about the good man, the evil man, the good and the evil. That's kind of the context of Matthew 12. And of course, we're getting up to the sign of Jonah verses here very soon. But it's important to put it in that context. Okay, and then verse 38, Dorothy.
Then certain of the scribes and the Pharisees answered, saying, Master, we would see a sign from thee.
Okay, thank you.
Always ask for that.
Do you think?
It just gets me that they would ask a sign when there's already been lots of signs.
Yeah, exactly.
It's healing people,
Yeah.
raising the dead.
Yeah.
You know, it's crazy.
Okay, well, that's going to be an interesting point. I think in a way they were creating a diversion. It's kind of like the woman at the well, where he was telling her about her past, and she brought up about, where should we worship. It's kind of like a diversion, isn't it? So what did they ask? They asked for a sign of what? What were they wanting a sign about?
He was the Messiah.
Okay, Dorothy said if he was the Messiah. It actually doesn't say in the text, okay? But that's what the common understanding is, that they were asking for a sign of who he was. Was he really from God? Was he the Messiah? But Jesus obviously knew that he was the Messiah. Okay, let's go to Matthew 12:39. This is more of his answer.
But he answered and said unto them, An evil and adulterous generation seeketh after a sign, and there shall no sign be given to it, the sign of the prophet Jonah.
Okay. So many will say it was a sign that he was, we've talked about this, the Messiah. Do you see any problem with that?
Problem with what?
With them, with the idea that it was talking about a sign that he was the Messiah.
Yeah, I have some problems with this because we have people like this today in Christianity where they treat it like it's voodoo or like what you see in some parts of Eastern Europe where you look at tea leaves or coffee leaves, coffee grinds. I don't think people should be treating God like he's a magician. I just need a sign. I need signs. I need signs. It's supposed to be that we have established a relationship with the Lord and that we trust him and love him, not looking for signs. Sorry, I feel strong about this.
We're going to see a very interesting connection there, yes. But the problem I see is that if they were thinking the sign of Jonah was a sign that he was the Messiah, if you look at Matthew 12:39, it says, no sign will be given but the sign of the prophet Jonah. That indicates one sign and one sign only, doesn't it, grammatically? The problem is there were many signs that he was the Messiah. Judy mentioned there was lots of them. There was the virgin birth, the place of his birth, the time of his birth, his many, many miracles. Those were all signs that he was the Messiah. In fact, there's a couple of verses that really help with that. John 20:30-31, Kylie.
And many other signs truly did Jesus in the presence of his disciples, which are not written in this book. But these are written that ye might believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God, and that believing ye might have life through his name.
Okay, so many signs that you might believe that Jesus is the Christ or the Messiah. So the one sign referred to there, I couldn't be talking about that. Michael.
Well, I keep on raising a hand, but it's not doing it. Matthew 16:1 would tell us what sort of signs they were actually looking for, right? Pharisees also with the Sadducees came, tempting, desired him that he would show them a sign from heaven. So I think they were looking for miracles. Not so much that he's the Messiah, They had totally rejected him on that. I think they were looking for miraculous, something that they could base more of their faith on, I guess.
Right. Now, what you're referring to, Matthew 16:1, is a totally different setting.
It is.
Um,
But it's still asking, that's the sign. They were asking him a sign, which he didn't give him except Jonah. Then on that, the next time they asked him, Matthew 16, talking about the weather, etc. Anyway, they wouldn't believe him no matter what happened anyway.
no, it doesn't seem like it. Okay, so we read John 20, Matthew 11:3-5.
And John said unto him, Art thou he that should come, or do we look for another? Jesus answered and said unto them, Go and shew John again those things which ye do hear and see. The blind receive their sight, the lame walk, the lepers are cleansed, the deaf hear, the dead are raised up, and the poor have the gospel preached to them. Yeah, that's a lot of signs.
Yes, and Jesus himself gave that list of signs. And
Yeah.
this was a question about whether he was the Messiah or not. This is John the Baptist asking him because he was doubting whether Jesus, who he had actually pointed out to be the Lamb of God, he doubted whether he was the Messiah or not at that point when he was in prison and wasn't getting released, and Jesus didn't seem to be doing anything about it. But in Jesus' answer, he definitely gave evidence that he was the Messiah.
Yeah.
So they must have been asking, or Jesus, when he said, no sign will be given to it but the sign of Jonah, okay, one sign and one sign only, he must have been referring to something else. And I would ask what? And from the context, what we've looked at so far, I think it's about character. Okay? Would God heal the man that was possessed and blind and dumb or not? Definitely character fits into this, I believe. So the initial question involves, would God heal or approve of healing this man, or was he punishing the man himself? Okay, so the sign that Jesus referred to then is in Matthew 12:40.
For as Jonas was 3 days and 3 nights in the whale's belly, so shall the Son of Man be 3 days and 3 nights in the heart of the earth.
Okay, so how many signs were to be given in response to what they wanted a sign of? One, no sign but. Okay, only one sign. So it's important then to understand the sign of Jonah in order to know what Jesus was referring to. And I wrote a book, back in about 2004, so that's 20 years ago now, started studying this, and I made it a major part of my kind of personal study for about 5 years. And then in 2009, I published this book in hard copy, In the Heart of the Earth, and the subtitle is The Secret Code That Reveals What is in the Heart of God. Okay, but shortly before it was published, I was introduced in 2008 to the concept of the true character of God. Okay, so I was able to incorporate that to the limited extent I knew about it into this book. So here's a real issue here. How to get 3 days and 3 nights. Here's a little chart of the possible duration of Jesus' time in the heart of the earth, wherever that is. He died on the preparation day. I put a little cross here. So it was late, we'll say about 3 o'clock Friday afternoon. In the standard understanding, he was raised before daybreak, before sunrise on Sunday morning. So if you look at this, it's 2 days and 2 nights. Okay, in fact, this day is only maybe 3 hours of the day, and it even took a while to get him into the grave, of course. So an hour, who knows how much, of one day, one other full day, that is daylight portion, and 2 nights. And because of that, it's caused many people to come up with an amazing array of theories the time. And I believe that looking at it from the perspective of the character of God makes a big difference. And it helped me to understand. Here's something from Bullinger, who's a well-known writer quite some time ago. It says, the fact that 3 days is used by Hebrew idiom for any part of 3 days and 3 nights is not disputed, because that was the common way of reckoning, just as it was when used of years. 3 or any number of years was used inclusively of any part of those years, as may be seen in the reckoning of the reign of any of the kings of Israel and Judah, and that is certainly true. Then he goes on to say, but when the number of nights is stated as well as the number of days, then the expression ceases to be an idiom and becomes a literal statement of fact. Okay, so it's saying it was literally 3 days and 3 nights. It turns out there are many translation issues involved, as there is in so many points related to the character of God. In this issue of the timing of the resurrection, there's translation issues and all kinds of problems. So let's look at some of the words involved in the heart of the earth. Okay, heart is from the Greek word cardia. There's the Strong's number. And a definition of that from Strong's or similar source. An examination, including the context of all 160 uses of the Greek word cardia in the New Testament, will show that there is not another verse where it has been used in the sense of the middle or center of anything. It also is never used in terms of the heart, the organ in your chest that pumps blood, okay? When Jesus used the word heart, he used it in the sense of the mind. In fact, you can go on in Matthew 12, just the chapter we're looking at, and other places, and see where he used the original word cardia, often translated as heart, to mean the mind, the thinking, really. An example here, Matthew 9:4. Kylie.
And Jesus, knowing their thoughts, said, wherefore think ye evil in your heart?
Okay, so that heart there is from the Greek word cardia. And we recognize cardia because we use it for cardiac and similar words. There is a Greek word mesos. We see it used here in Matthew 14:24.
The ship was now in the midst of the sea, tossed with waves, for the wind was contrary.
So earth is from the Greek word gay, it's pronounced, number 1093. And the lexicon says soil, by extension a region or the solid part of the whole terrene globe, talking about the earth, including the occupants. Okay, so it can mean the people of the earth. And a good example of that is Revelation 13:3. Dorothy.
And I saw one of the heads as if it were wounded to death, and his deadly wound was healed, and all the world wondered after the beast.
Okay, so the word world is from that Greek word gay there. That's used, translated as earth in that phrase, in the heart of the earth. And then we have this term, the first day of the week. And in the Greek, that is miaton sabaton. And first is from the Greek word mia, which is normally translated as one. Okay, 62 times. It's only translated as first 8 times, and those are mainly in verses talking about the resurrection. That phrase, first day of the week. It really should be one. The normal word for first is protos, and you see it used here in Matthew 26:17. Hollis.
Now the first day of the feast of unleavened bread, the disciples came to Jesus, saying unto him, where wilt thou that we prepare for thee to eat the Passover?
Okay, so protos is the Greek word used for first day. And first day of the feast is very similar to first day of the week. Same kind of construction. So why couldn't first have been used in that phrase, the Greek word for first? Why would both Matthew and Mark use protos to mean first day of something? That verse, this verse here, and Mark's version of it, and not in reference to the first day of the week, if that is what they meant. Perhaps they did not mean first day of the week. Also, day is supplied in each case of the use of first day of the week, it's not in there. It's added by the translators. And week is translated from the Greek word sabbaton, which means Sabbath. And I should mention this before, wherever you see this, that's referring to a page in my book, In the Heart of the Earth. And that is not the printed 2009 version, but the more recent version, this year's. So, Sabbaton is translated Sabbath in every case, except in those few verses referring to the resurrection. And here, this is from my book again, the Greek word hebdomas does not appear in the Greek New Testament, but is frequently used in the Septuagint, which is the Greek translation of the Old Testament. There is no reason why the commonly used words for first day of the week could not have been used. Okay, so there is a word for week. And this is a quote from a fellow who wrote quite a bit about this. All scholars without exception recognize that Sabbaton is not native to the Greek language, because the Greek culture despised the Sabbath and did not even have a 7-day week prior to the Romans taking over. They had no word for Sabbath or Sabbaton. In fact, I have yet to find the word used in the Septuagint or writings of the Ante-Nicene Fathers, that is, writers before the Council of Nicaea in the 300s AD, to refer to first day of the week, nor can it be found in any extra-biblical literature such as Plato, Socrates, or a plethora of other ancient Greek writings referring to Sunday. Hence, that is the word Sabbaton, was imported from Hebrew by Jewish writers of the New Testament. Now, if a word is imported because it has no equivalent in that language, its meaning in the new language is invariably going to be consistent with the meaning in the original language. Okay, so that's an argument for the word Sabbaton always meaning the seventh-day Sabbath. Okay? And so Miaton Sabbaton is really one of the Sabbaths. It refers to one of the Sabbaths in the interval between Passover and Pentecost, when they were actually told to count Sabbaths. Okay? And there's much more detail in my book on the meaning of those words, first day and week. And I'll show that the resurrection was on Sabbath, not Sunday, when you put that all together. And that's not really our issue today, but this comes into it. And of course, that conflicts with the common understanding. And we read statements like this: his work completed, his hands folded in peace, he rested through the sacred hours of the Sabbath day. And the whole world celebrates the resurrection on Easter Sunday. And this was all brought about, I believe, to exalt Sunday. And by the way, there's a good explanation for this statement here, consistent with what I'm saying in this book. I asked the question about what the sign of Jonah was a sign of. And it was, we haven't maybe nailed that down here yet. It was brought up about the timing. And I don't think that's correct, because their question had nothing to do with time. And Jesus knew what their question was about. He was part of the discussion that was going on there. And we saw in the context it was more about character. He included in his answer something about time, but that was not at all a part of their question. So I don't think that's really part of it. So let's consider the start of the 3 days and 3 nights. And there's quite a few references to 3 days, after 3 days. There's a variety of terms used. And I've kind of charted them out here. And I don't have the verse in here. Would you like to look at maybe Mark 10:33 to 34?
10, 33, and 34.
Yeah, I'll just read those 2 verses. And just as Judy reads it, just follow what I've got here on the screen.
Behold, we are going up to Jerusalem, and the Son of Man will be delivered to the chief priests and to the scribes, and they will condemn him to death and deliver him to the Gentiles. And they will mock him, scourge him, and spit on him, and kill him. And the 3rd day he will rise again.
Okay, so that's a good example, because it has many of these factors involved in it. The 3rd day is really the 3rd day including all of these events. Okay? And that's quite clear in some of the verses, not so clear in others. In fact, some, like Luke 24:46, just says he will suffer. Doesn't include some of these other things here. So actually, Jesus was delivered in three different levels or instances, you could say. He was delivered by God to the will of man. See that in Romans 8:32. Kali, you're muted.
He that spared not his own son, but delivered him up for us all, how shall he not with him also freely give us all things?
Okay, so it's obvious there that this is referring to the son being delivered by his father. And then he was delivered by Judas to the chief priests, Mark 10:33.
Myself, but whosoever shall deny me before men, him will I also deny before my Father which is in heaven.
Okay.
It's on there twice.
Oh, okay. How did I do that? Well, it's because we're quoting two different parts of it here. So, Dorothy, if you could read this next part here. This is about being delivered by the Jews to the Romans.
They, the chief priests and the scribes, shall deliver him to the Gentiles.
Okay, so can you see that he was delivered by his father to man? He was delivered by Judas to the chief priests and by the Jews to the Romans. In fact, there's even, I guess, a verse that says of Pilate that he delivered him up to be crucified. So obviously there was multiple cases in which he was delivered. The 3 days and 3 nights really started Tuesday evening of that week with these events when the leaders consulted that they might kill him. And I've got the verses here in Matthew 26. That was the initial betrayal by Judas. Okay, we think of often as betrayal by Judas as Thursday night in the Garden of Gethsemane. Well, he was betrayed before that and even was given the 30 pieces of silver on that Tuesday evening. And also he was anointed by Mary Magdalene on that Tuesday evening, and Jesus himself said she did it for my burial. So there's mistakes in understanding, translation, and even verse divisions that have contributed to problems here. And we can't go into all the issues. Like I said, this is a 200-page book. But and that's not the object here, but I'll share a couple of examples of some of these problems. It's often brought up about when the women bought spices. So Mark 16:1, Kylie.
And when the Sabbath was past, Mary Magdalene and Mary, the mother of James and Salome, had bought sweet spices that they might come and anoint him.
So this is often used to develop the theory of a Wednesday crucifixion, because they figured they had to buy spices after crucifixion day and before the resurrection. But when you look at had bought, and this is just another word investigation, you can see its meaning in other uses of that term. For instance, Luke 14:18. Dorothy.
Yeah, you said that Mary Magdalene, she did wiped his feet with her hair, and she anointed him. So did she know about this betrayal? Is that what you mean by this?
I don't think she would have known much.
I don't think she knew what was going on. You know, Jesus said, she has anointed me for the burial. I don't know that he knew that, although Jesus had said to his disciples, to his followers a few times that he was going to die. And we have to talk about how they did not understand. It's just like beyond their comprehension. But somehow she understood. Possibly. You know, she'd have had more understanding than the guys maybe. Okay, so the point here is that in Luke 14:18, this person said, I have bought a piece of ground. Okay, so that's in the past tense. He had already bought it, and now he was going to see about it. These women had bought spices previously. You know, they may have gone home to, mix them up or in a bag by the door ready to go or something like that. But They make it sound like they had to go buy them and spend hours preparing them. It doesn't say anything like that.
So is that the King James version that says had bought?
Yes.
Because my New King James says bought.
Yes.
So, yeah.
Those are past tense. Another question is when the women came to the tomb. This can be a big problem. Matthew 28:1.
In the end of the Sabbath, as it began to dawn toward the first day of the week, came Mary Magdalene and the other Mary to see the sepulchre.
Okay. Anyone see a problem with that verse, just the way it reads there?
Well, the Sabbath ends at sunset.
And
it doesn't dawn the first day of the week. What?
well, it says in the end of the Sabbath, as it began to dawn, implying
Toward
it's
the
the
first
same, implying that it's the same time.
Yeah.
Okay. So there's a good solution to this, which really helps a lot, actually. The phrase in the end of the Sabbath uses the Greek word opsi, for end. The original word is used just 2 other times in the New Testament. And here's the examples. Mark 11:19.
And when even was come, he went out of the city.
Okay, thank you. So even is from that word opsi. And then Mark 11:35. 13:35.
Watch ye therefore, for you know not when the master of the house cometh, even, or at midnight, or at the cock crowing, or in the morning.
Okay, so again, the word even comes from the Greek opsi there. Okay, so you can see that here in the end of the Sabbath, translated in the evening of the Sabbath, which is the dark part of the Sabbath. Okay, not the morning, like at dawn. Okay, and then Matthew 27:62-4.
Now the next day that followed the day of the preparation, the chief priests and Pharisees came together unto Pilate, saying, Sir, we remember that deceiver said, while he was yet alive, after 3 days I will rise again. Command therefore that the sepulchre be made sure until the 3rd day, lest his disciples come by night and steal him away, and say unto the people, He is risen from the dead. So the last there shall be worse than the first.
Okay, so this is just pointing out that the Pharisees came to Pilate, and they were concerned that the disciples would steal the body, so they're requesting a guard. And when does the next day start? The day of preparation was Friday, the day of the crucifixion. When does the next day start?
At evening.
At evening, at sunset. Okay?
Yeah.
So my understanding is they came, just as he was being buried, perhaps, and asked for a guard. If they had waited till the next day, as in Sabbath afternoon, there would have been risk of the disciples coming Friday night, Sabbath morning to steal the body. And they certainly wouldn't want that to happen.
So they went and made the sepulchre sure, sealing the stone and setting a watch in the evening of the Sabbath.
Okay, so I've modified it a little bit to say in the evening of the Sabbath rather than the end of the Sabbath, because that's what the word means. So this would make sense in light of the desire to post a guard to prevent the stealing of the body. The next verse then would introduce a change of subject and read like this. This is also modified a little bit.
As it began to dawn towards the first day of the week, came Mary Magdalene and the other Mary to see the sepulchre.
Okay, can you see what I've done here? I basically I've changed this to the end of the Sabbath and moved it from 28:1 to 27:66. So what I'm saying is that they set the watch the evening of the Sabbath, so just after sunset, and then you go into a new topic, really, and a new time. As it began to dawn toward the first day of the week, they came to see the sepulchre.
Okay, so you're saying that perhaps the translators put that phrase in the evening of the Sabbath in the wrong place.
And not even the translators, because originally when it was translated, there weren't chapter and verse divisions.
That's what I mean.
Yeah, this is a later, even after the translation, this is a later error, I would say, when they divided it into verses, chapters and verses.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So,
Thank you.
Go ahead, Hollis.
Thank you for correcting chronology.
Yeah. So in those two verses, there's both a translation error, that word the opsi or evening, and there's a verse division error. It should have been divided between the end of the Sabbath, end of that verse, and then new topic as it began to dawn in chapter 28.
When were those chapter and verse divisions made?
I don't remember, but it was the way it was along. Sure.
Century or something.
Yes. Okay, now here's another issue, and this one starts to get quite interesting here. So here's a verse that seems to suggest 3 days from Jesus' death to resurrection. John 2:19-21.
Jesus answered and said unto them, Destroy this temple, and in 3 days I will raise it up. Then said the Jews, 46 years was this temple in building, and wilt thou rear it up in 3 days? He spake of the temple of his body.
Okay, thank you. So isn't that referring to a resurrection 3 days after his death? It kind of sounds like it at first. But Jesus even corrected their misunderstanding that he was referring to the temple building. He was clearly speaking about his body. The word destroy, this word here, is from the Greek word leo, for which the online Bible Greek lexicon gives the major definitions as to loose any person or thing, to loose one bound, to unbind, set free, loosen, undo. You can see all the different definitions there. Its 43 uses in the King James Version are translated as loose 27 times, in a variety of other ways, including destroy just 2 times. So usually it's to loose as opposed to destroy. The one other case of luo translated as destroy in the King James Version is 1 John 3:8.
He that committeth sin is of the devil, for the devil sinneth from the beginning. For this purpose the Son of God was manifested, that he might destroy the works of the devil.
Okay? So that is destroy the works of the devil, not destroy or kill the devil. The original word luo does not mean and is never used in the Bible with the meaning of to kill. We've come to understand it to mean that in those 2 verses because of the way the King James translators translated it into English. Okay? Jesus raised himself, but not from the dead, because he was dead, right? He couldn't do that. He raised himself in that he reversed the rejection, casting off the luo, at least for some people. The Pharisees, etc., luoed, and I've kind of anglicized the word there. They luoed him, they cast him off, they disregarded him, rejected him. But the result was that the works of the devil were luoed or destroyed, as in destroy the works of the devil, at least in the minds of those who looked to Jesus and accepted him. Okay, does that make sense? He was rejected, and the word is luo by the Pharisees.
You asked a question just now, and I wanted to respond. Can you just
Yeah, it's a bit confusing.
Okay, yeah. So the word luo is translated as destroy up here. Destroy this temple. Jesus was referring to himself. Okay, but he didn't mean to kill in that case. And evidence for that, among other evidences, is destroy the works of the devil, is that same word luo. It's not talking about killing the devil. It's talking about, dismantling his kingdom, destroying his works, exposing him for what he really is, you might say. So the Pharisees, I'm saying they luoed Jesus. They rejected him. Okay, they cast him off. They didn't kill him in this verse. Okay, it's talking about the rejection of him.
How would that sound in that verse when Jesus was saying, destroy this temple? If we try to put this like, reject me, reject my teaching?
Yes. When he said destroy this temple, he wasn't saying, if you kill me, I will raise myself up in 3 days. Okay?
But he spake of the temple of his body, so
Yes. But the word, he was talking about his body, but the word destroy does not mean to kill. Okay? And we have this clue that he could not raise his own body because he was dead. There's no consciousness in the grave. And there's many, many verses that talk about he was raised by his Father. I didn't put any in here, but there's many of them.
So is it his teaching then? But because the teaching is to be rejected, like it's not about Jesus' body really.
Right. Well, if they reject him, what they're really rejecting is his teachings. Okay, they don't have anything against his body. It's what his teaching that they want to do away with because it's affecting their power over the people and such things.
But while he was alive and teaching, his body is identified with his teaching. That's why he's saying that if you reject me, basically personally, then you are rejecting the teaching. And it will come up, it will be raised up within 3 days.
Yes. Well, we're going to get to the meaning of raised up here in a moment. So let's go to John 12:31 to 33.
I think that's
Now is the judgment of this world. Now shall the prince of this world be cast out, and I, if I be lifted up from the earth, will draw all men unto me. Then he said, signifying what death he should die.
Okay, the being lifted up was a reference to crucifixion, really. So the crucifixion was the opportunity for people to make a decision for or against the Messiah. Some, at least some of the people lured or cast out Satan's lies and were drawn to the Messiah. Was it a demonstration of a God requiring appeasement in blood, or a God who was self-sacrificing and always honoring the free will of his creatures? Each observer had to process the events in relation to their understanding of God. Okay, and here's an interesting verse from way back at the time of Jesus' baptism, Luke 2:35.
Yea, a sword shall pierce through thine own soul also, that the thoughts of many hearts may be revealed.
Okay.
that's at his dedication, sorry, not his baptism.
Okay. Yes. Yeah, right.
That was Simeon's words, I think.
Yep. This is Simeon speaking to his mother Mary, referring to the time of the crucifixion, that the thoughts of many hearts may be revealed. As they looked on that scene, their concept of God's character very much played a part in that. It was quite ironic that even while they were taunting him when he was on the cross, they were taunting him to come down. Okay, and here's the taunt, Matthew 27:40.
And saying, thou that destroyest the temple and buildest it in 3 days, save thyself. If thou be the Son of God, come down from the cross.
Okay, so they were taunting him with that while he was there on the cross. So he was raised or lifted up exactly as he said he would be. He said, if I be lifted up. He was raised up 3 days after they had finally rejected or destroyed him. Well, the word is destroyed, but the proper term is luo. They rejected him, plotted his death, and made a deal with his betrayer. At that moment, he was raised, not from the dead, but raised up that sinners may look and live. Okay? So when he said raised up, he was not referring to being raised from the dead. He was referring to being raised up on the cross, just like in this example in John 3:14-15. Dorothy.
And as Moses lifted up the serpent in the wilderness, even so must the Son of Man be lifted up, that whosoever believeth in him should not perish, but have eternal life.
This is Jesus talking to Nicodemus back in John 3, and speaking of himself being lifted up. And then, we've read this before, but let's read again, John 12:32.
But I, if I, be lifted up from the earth, will draw all men unto me.
Okay? So, lifted up in those verses, that is, it's lifted up in John 3, and this lifted up here. So both use the Greek word hupso, meaning to lift up on high, to exalt. Okay, it's not talking about just a physical raising. It's exalting or lifting up so people could see and honor and understand. That is the sense in which Jesus would raise up his body. Okay, he wasn't talking about raising it up from the grave. He was talking about raising it up in this sense, as Moses lifted the serpent in the wilderness. Okay, let's read Matthew 12:40.
For as Jonas was 3 days and 3 nights in the whale's belly, so shall the Son of Man be 3 days and 3 nights in the heart of the earth.
Okay.
I don't understand how that could be
Okay.
when it comes.
Dorothy, just keep an eye on the list on the right-hand side of the screen here, so we get the readers in the right order.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're going to explore this to help understand. So the Bible points us in the right direction. The sign of the prophet Jonas, for as Jonah was 3 days and 3 nights in the whale's belly. I'm emphasizing this, as Jonah was. So here's a little comparison chart. Jonah, it says actually, as Jonah was, so shall the Son of Man be. It's talking about condition or state of being, right? Jonah was 3 days and 3 nights in the whale's belly. Jesus was 3 days and 3 nights in the heart of the earth. So they're both common. The difference here is in the whale's belly, in the case of Jonah, that's where he was, and Jesus was in the heart of the earth. The wording suggests that something about their condition was similar. The emphasis was not on as long as Jonah was, so long shall Jesus be. The time was the same, but the time was not the emphasis. Also, the emphasis was not where Jonah was, there shall Jesus be, because the location was not the most important part. Indeed, they were different. This is all, well, I've got it here, page 19. That's where I got this from. The emphasis was, as Jonah was, so shall Jesus be. It was on their respective conditions, okay? And it is as Jonah was in the whale, not as some have suggested that he arrived. Okay, so it's talking about how Jonah was when he was in the whale, not as some have suggested that he arrived at the gates of Nineveh, covered in seaweed and smelling like the insides of a whale. Sometimes people will say that, and therefore the Ninevites took notice. It was so miraculous. So what was his condition in the whale? Jonah was alive. He was confined within that very tight space, I'm sure. And he was headed to where he did not want to go. Remember, he was fleeing to Tarshish. He wanted to get away from this task that Jesus was asking him to do. In fact, the whale took him back in the direction of Nineveh, it seems. So I've got a little chart here, and I'm not going to read it all. I'll just leave it on the screen for a moment, and you can go back and review it. I'll just read a couple of them to give you the idea. So Jonah prayed unto the Lord. Clearly, he would have wanted out of the whale, right? And Jesus said, "O my Father, if it be possible, let this cup pass from me." Physically, he did not want to go through the crucifixion. Who would? But there's a way in which he did want to go through it, and we'll see a statement about that later. In verse 2 of Jonah 2, it says, "I cried by reason of mine affliction." In Matthew 27, Jesus cried with a loud voice. Okay, and there's quite a few comparisons here to show that there was very, very many similarities between them. But a contrast is that Jonah wanted Nineveh destroyed, and we understand that from reading the story, whereas Jesus, of course, was concerned about salvation. And I put the word overthrown here. I don't want to get into this too much, but you can see the link here. And overthrown, in the context of Jonah going to Nineveh, we think of it as the complete destruction of Nineveh. But in fact, it can mean to turn, to repent, that sort of thing. So when God said, yet 40 days, or he told Jonah to say, yet 40 days and Nineveh will be overthrown, he was exactly right, and it turned out right because they did turn. They repented. It was overthrown in that sense, not in the sense of being destroyed. So it can have that meaning. Okay, so here's another look at the possible durations of Jesus' time in the heart of the earth. And the standard one that we've already looked at was from the burial to the resurrection, which is just 2 days and 2 nights, barely. Another way people have looked at it is from the rejection and initial betrayal right to the resurrection on Sunday morning or just before sunrise. When you do that, you get 4 days and 5 nights, actually. But I'm saying it's from his rejection to his death. It's during that time where he was rejected until the time where he raised himself up so people could really get that demonstration of character and accept him in many cases. So again, destroy, that was his luo that happened Tuesday night when he was rejected. That was the start of it. And the end of it was when he raised it up, when he was raised up on the cross. It's not even referring to his resurrection. And I put a couple pages here you can look at that talk about accommodation, just so you can understand the term. I don't want to go into it too much here. But basically, accommodation just means, allowing for, we might allow for the immaturity of our children by letting them get away with things at a young age that we would want them to take care of when they're older. Also, I put here a page of a study we did quite recently showing that God did not want sacrifices. Okay? He did not actually want them. And there's a good explanation for why they were instituted. But let's read Psalm 40 and verse 6. That would be Dorothy.
Sacrifice and offering thou didst not desire, mine ears hast thou opened. Burnt offering and sin offering hast thou not required.
Okay. And I put here, this is just a cover of my little booklet, Biblical Forgiveness. There's various covers and quite a few translations of it. Are there 2 types? And by that question, I'm bringing up the fact that there are different words for forgiveness granted, which God always does, and forgiveness received, which is conditional on us, repenting and understanding that God does forgive. Anyway, this book goes into it here. God did not require blood to forgive sins. He forgives all sins. We required it, sacrifices, to satisfy our concept of justice that we might feel forgiven. And the whole sacrificial system was really an accommodation on God's part to help us realize that we can be forgiven. Yeah. So we can consider what I call the ultimate accommodation. Jesus gave his life, even though it was not required by God, in order to satisfy his justice, so that we could then receive forgiveness. Okay? We could feel forgiven. It's really because we required it. Tim Jennings has a good little saying sometimes to contrast 2 attitudes, you could say. Some people will have the attitude, take your life that I might live, but Jesus had the attitude of give my life that you might live. Okay, even eternally. One book I read, and I don't have the exact reference, referring to Jesus, I guess on his way to Jerusalem at the end there, he says, his footsteps pressed eagerly towards the place of execution. And I just have to marvel at that. Like, how could he do that? But he was looking at the end result of what would happen. Oh, when he was lifted up on the cross, many would be drawn towards him. It was pretty amazing that he would press eagerly towards that place. Jesus was indeed given to the world, given to us to do with him as we please. And what did we do? Well, we